Good evening, everyone. We welcome all of you on behalf of Friday Waters, an initiative of the W4W Foundation. The idea of Friday Waters is to make Fridays fun-filled and yet add fruitful activities for the future generation. The focus of Water Arts is on bringing the artists who have done or are doing art, music, or other art forms on water matters to the session to discuss the making of the artwork and the issues around the subject covered. Besides bringing interest in water conversation, this also intends to increase the outreach of the art work in the water networks as well as in the society at large. Because we strongly believe that actually if there is any reform possible in the society, art work really makes a huge difference in that. So for today's session of Water Arts, we will walk along with the authors and artists of the art book, which is Ways of Knowing. We have today Nipesh Palat Narayanan, Natasha Cornea, Surindar Dhesi, and Promina Shrestha to understand the work of Ways of Knowing. So welcome Nipesh, Natasha, Surindar, and Promina. Let me briefly introduce you all before we get the conversation rolling. So Nipesh Narayanan is an assistant professor at the Institut National de la, it's difficult for me to really spell the name, but I'll try again. So Nipesh is an assistant professor at the Institut National de la Recherche Scientifique. Did I correctly pronounce it?
Yes, but you can just call it INRS. It's the language politics, which does not allow them to have an English translation.
Okay, so thank you. So in Canada, his work explores knowledge hegemonies by investigating everyday infrastructures, informal practices, and culinary cultures. Interesting. So welcome, Nipesh. Natasha Cornea is an associate professor in human geography at the University of Birmingham, UK. Her research focuses on processes of environmental governance and urban politics in cities in the South Asia. So welcome, Natasha. Surindar Dhesi is an associate professor in environmental health and risk management at the University of Birmingham, UK also. Her research is on health inequalities and environmental health, particularly focusing on the living and working conditions experienced by the vulnerable people. So welcome, Surindar. Then we have Promina Shrestha. She is an illustrator, comic artist, and researcher in the field of visual arts and is currently focusing on her own project while farming somewhere in Nepal. She is co-founder of Virangana Comics and is a passionate about identity politics, mental health, and working with children. So thanks, Promina, for joining us, and welcome again to all of you. And thanks all of you for agreeing for this, sharing this beautiful artwork. So may I request to really share the background of making of this comic or artwork, as you may like to call it. We also want to know that. And just to start this conversation here, and then I will have a few questions for you to really take it up from here. Thanks.
Thank you, Mansee, for that introduction and also for organizing this. It's really nice. You raised a very good question as to what to call it. We have been calling it illustrated book / booklet, but so it's okay whichever way you refer to it. So since the book is available online, it's an open source book. If you would like to refer to it, you can download those who are listening to it. In this presentation, which we plan to do, can you move to the next slide, please? We basically want to touch upon three things. So basically the larger research project from which the book comes from. So what was the project? How did we get into it? So not the details of the project per se or the results, but to basically discuss where it comes from. And then we will discuss the booklet, the idea behind the booklet, and what we aim to do. And then the challenges and opportunity is for us to discuss. It's also a good way for us to debrief, because after the book has come, 4 of us have not got together to discuss it. So it's an opportunity for us also. Thank you. Now I will hand over to Natasha.
Thank you. So this book comes out of the Social Construction of Canals project. So This project was British Council funded with their Science South Asia small grants that required partnership between a UK-based institution and a South Asia-based institution. So at the time, Nipesh was at the University of Colombo, which I'll come to. And our initial goal in this project was really to think about the intersecting rationalities of aesthetics and environmental health in Colombo, centered particularly around the Curulapana Canal. So the project asked, how do residents imagine their life and health with the canal? How is polluting the canal discursively justified as opposed to other public infrastructure like roads? And how is environmental health discursively framed, and what is the positionality of water and canals in it? So this project really emerged out of some initial observations by Nipesh when he was based in Colombo, that the canal was treated very differently than the streets, and kind of questions wondering why that was. So it was a collaboration, like I said, between the University of Birmingham and the University of Colombo. So it was Nipesh, who was at the University of Colombo at the time, and myself at the University of Birmingham. So we're former colleagues from our PhD days at the University of Lausanne. So we knew each other and our work through that, and we're kind of keen to have an opportunity to do a bit of work together. The opportunity came up, and then Surindar and I are colleagues at the University of Birmingham. Equally, Surindar and I were quite keen to work together. So Surindar works in the space of environmental health, so that's that focus in the project. And so it really led to this quite interesting partnership and collaborative thinking where we each brought our own expertise to play. So Nipesh in this project in particular was, really brought the expertise around Southern theory and knowledge hegemonies, urban political ecology, so the ways in which the environment is politicized and enrolled into political processes is kind of my core expertise, and Surindar's, like we said before, with environmental health. And so the initial project really generated a lot of research collaborations, thinking, questioning around those areas. And then we were able to bring in Promina with clear expertise on visual arts, later on in the process to produce this book. And as we were thinking about this, one of the kind of really appealing things about Promina's experience was that she had quite a bit of experience working with researchers, quite a strong social science background herself as well. And so there was a feeling that she was kind of ideal for illustrating a project like this that was a little bit maybe abstract from the outset. And so the research project itself involved a number of different methods. So there was document analysis, so the analysis of a variety of plans, maps, and other government documents in particular, as well as a little bit of archival analysis, though the archives didn't kind of throw up quite as much as we had hoped. Participant observation was really important, just lots of time spent in the field, observing what people did, observing why they did it. And then a whole range of interviews with both local residents who lived along the canal and with officials that were involved in the management and governance of the canal. So these interviews were primarily conducted by our research assistant, Franga Wickraman Singh. I can never get that name out all in one go, apologies, by myself and by Natasha. But we faced a lot of COVID complications. So the research for this was happening in the kind of a few months before COVID hit, and then attempting to continue as COVID hit. So we had planned a whole range of focus groups that obviously didn't happen. Our timeline stretched out quite significantly. So the initial plan was really 2-3 months of kind of really intense field work, and then an intense period of analysis. We had planned a conference that was also going to double as a research trip for Surindar to conduct fieldwork in person in Colombo. That again got cancelled because of COVID. The conference itself eventually got moved online after many attempts at rescheduling it. So we had all of these complications that really altered the ways that we might have done things. And while I think we've gotten quite a bit of really, really kind of rich data, in spite of those, it definitely shifted the focus, and unfortunately, to a certain extent, shifted the focus more away from the health side of things than what was originally intended, because we were really dependent on Surindar being able to help us with that. So that's the project itself. I'm going to hand back to Nipesh to talk about how we then decided to disseminate some of that through a comic or illustrated book.
So the book in itself, we should definitely point this out that we're not the first one using this medium as a means to engage in research, especially social science research. There is in the last decade or so, there has been a lot of increase in use of comics illustrations, although forms of map making and memory tracings have been there, but those were more not based so much on the focus was not so much on the final product, but what goes behind the product. But comics and illustrations have come out a way, both as a research method in itself, where you draw with your participants and develop a comic book to understand the narratives therein, and also as a means to express and disseminate the final results to a larger audience. Could you go to the next slide, please? So our main intention with this book, as Natasha has explained before, it's that the research has happened, and then we decided to do this book. So it's basically a dissemination of results, and we came up with it because it was, for example, we were dealing with the notion of knowledge hegemonies. It's a very abstract concept, and it's quite complicated. It's an easy concept to understand because we on our day-to-day life we deal with knowledge hegemonies, but it's a very difficult concept to explain when you don't use the term in your day-to-day life. It's like any other concept like time. If it's everyone uses on a day-to-day basis, it's very easy to understand because it's intermingled with our life. But if you suddenly meet someone who does not use time, it's very complicated to explain what time is. So that way we thought that illustrations and stories could help us in explaining what knowledge hegemonies mean, and that could lead to a wider audience. So we initially, when we were writing the and discussing with Promina, we had students in mind. We had thought that this book would be a teaching resource. But as things moved on, we realized it can be used by colleagues, and also can be used by the environmental health practitioners and academics, both as a teaching resource, but also to use as a research output. Next slide. So the book is primarily divided into 3 parts. So 3 parts because there are 3 authors, and we were very clear from the beginning that because knowledge, the one concept of the basic concept of knowledge hegemony is that knowledge is subjective, that it is produced by a human being with a human bias and all those things which exist in a society. So the 3 parts which each of us led also are written and illustrated as in 3 different ways. So it's when you just flip through the book, of course it reads as one book, but when you read the details, you'll see the way we approach the same canal, because we all deal with the canal, is not only in 3 different subject expertise, but also 3 different way of narrating, 3 different ways of looking. So the first part is the part which I was dealing with, where I primarily asked the questions: how many Kirlapana canals are there? So the canal which we were researching is called Kirlapana Canal in Colombo, and the question which I ask is how. So next slide, please. So the basic idea is that all those people who are living around the Kirlapana Canal they engage and experience the canal differently. So there is not one Kirlapana canal as we would see on a map, but there are multiple Kirlapana canals. So this is one of the examples from the book where one person is saying how bad fishing is, while the other person is saying, oh no, it's amazing. It's very meditative. It's a day-to-day life I live. So based on the positionality of the person, based on the economic status, based on the background of the people, socio-cultural background of the people, they view and engage with the canal differently. So the idea is to really bring out that when we talk about canal, especially Kirlapana Canal and many other canals, there is one narrative which comes out. This is the canal which will be used as transport. This is the canal which is going to be the drainage system, but that's not the case. But there are multiple narratives, and only some narratives gets highlighted. So that's the knowledge hegemony we were talking about. Now we can go to the next part.
So the next part was the part that I wrote, and it basically focused on not the canal itself, but what the canal hosted and the ideas it hosted, understood through the crocodiles. So I asked, do you know the crocodiles? So the Kirlapana Canal has a variety of flora and fauna in it, including things like monitor lizards and somewhat elusive but rather infamous crocodiles living in it. And so I was really intrigued by the ways in which the canal and its inhabitants, its animal inhabitants, became enrolled into bigger stories that reflected broader politics in the city and in the country as a whole. And so most people agreed that the crocodiles weren't entirely new, but their presence, particularly lower down, closer to the sea, was new. But what was particularly interesting here was all of the different ways that they were explained. And all of those ways were inherently political. So for some people, the crocodiles, they claimed, emerged because they were placed in the canal to protect against LTTE fighters swimming up the canal to reach the Parliament building. Other people suggested that the crocodiles were placed in there only after a kind of high income block of flats was built, and it was entirely to stop the poorer residents in the surrounding areas from swimming across the canal and breaking into this gated community. So all of these different explanations were inherently political explanations. And so my section really questions the ways in which the inhabitants of the canal, the fauna of the canal, the more than human, becomes politicized and thus shapes the way we understand the canal itself.
Thank you. Yes, so my part was looking at the environmental health conditions in the canal. And as Natasha was saying, we had grand dreams and plans at the beginning of the project. And in my dream world, we would have done some sampling and so on to find out actually what was in the canal and whether, you know, what was happening with the fish, for example. But none of this was possible. So I wasn't able to travel. So I was very reliant on the data collected by colleagues. And mostly, I would say I relied on the interview data. And what I was finding was, as Natasha and Nipesh have mentioned, different people saw the canal in different ways. Some people were saying, you know, there's a lovely breeze that comes from the canal, whereas others were saying, you know, it smells so bad, I can't be near it. And this is a beautiful slide illustrated by Promina, which sort of sums up the issues of how important stories are and how important the perceptions of something being healthy or unhealthy are, and how these impact on how people live their daily lives. So for example, if the water was perceived as dangerous and polluted, then people didn't want to be, you know, catching fish to eat from it. Whereas if they saw it as a place of, you know, happy times from their childhood, for example, they would feel quite differently about it and be more happy to be around the canal. Next slide, please, Natasha.
And again, this is to sum up what we started with again, is that it's the same canal which three of us looked from three different disciplinary angles, but also the way the book is written is from three different artistic point of views. Like mine was more of a dialogue, while Natasha was exploration of the dialogue about the crocodile, and Surindar's get into the narratives and the nitty-gritties, which shows the environmental health relations which exist on ground. So just to point out again that knowledge is always produced. There isn't, like, the position is not that it exists there, which we are showing. It's a production, and our biases help in and depend the way the knowledge is produced. Next.
So we thought it would be useful to share some of the challenges that we encountered during this project. And the field restrictions have been touched on already, but certainly for me and Promina, we were, you know, writing and drawing around something that actually, as people, we weren't very familiar with and we hadn't been able to visit. So that was quite a restriction, and we were sense checking a lot of what we were doing with colleagues who had been there. And that was important because obviously it's very easy to read an interview transcript and get a, you know, completely different picture to someone who's more familiar with where that interview was carried out. Another thing that was a challenge for us was the space of where we were all based, different parts of the world. So different parts of the world, and then moving as well. So Natasha and I, as you know, are based in the UK, Promina in Nepal. Nipesh is our itchy-footed colleague who's gone to several different countries in the way of this project. And so we've not had the luxury of spending a lot of time together for team building. Natasha, Nipesh and I did manage to meet together in Italy at one point, but that was a really golden moment in quite a long project that has been very much communicating by Zoom and WhatsApp and email. So that's been a limitation. And the other thing is, and again we've touched on this quite a lot already, that, you know, we come from three very different academic and practitioner backgrounds. And so there were challenges around, you know, what does each of us want to say? What do we want it to look like? You know, the brief that we were giving Promina was different from each of us. I'm sure Promina will have things to say about the messages we were all giving and how she was trying to convey the different aspects that we were trying to get across. And obviously the three of us are not artists, so we had no idea whether we were asking for the impossible, and we'll be really interested in hearing what Promina has to say about that. Next slide, please, Natasha. We did also really want to highlight some tips, I suppose, for successful joint working. And the first one of these is really around acknowledging and respecting each other's expertise. It's so important. You know, Natasha was at times saying things very theoretical that I didn't fully understand, and I was very keen to learn from her and be open about the perspective she was bringing, just as she was very open to the suggestions that I was making from my knowledge. And I think by being very open and respectful and keen to learn from each other and very willing to listen to each other's views, we managed to keep a good balance in this piece of work, and to make sure that no particular angle or understanding has dominated, and that the balance is there between our different perspectives. Be interesting to know what everyone thinks, whether we've achieved that or not. Next slide, please.
So I guess it's my turn now. So for me, I've worked with researchers before. So I've written my own research papers, and I've actually worked with researchers virtually as well as in physical presence. So I've worked on graphic novels or making nonverbal comics. So the thing is, Nipesh approached me first through a mutual friend. He somehow figured out that I do this work, and he approached me, and the idea was to do a whole different set of research into a comic, and he had approached me about a year or two in advance, and I was kind of keen on it because I have been shifting my focus from writing actual papers to also illustrating and writing papers. So I was very keen on collaborating because I also work with another anthropologist professor for the last 5 years on creating an actual graphic novel, like a book for education. So I understood where Nipesh and Natasha and Surindar were heading towards. So initially the idea was to make a comic book out of it. So when they came with me with their text, I found it kind of difficult to make a comic book out of it because, as Surindar mentioned, I was not in the space, so I cannot visualize how would the spatial thing work and what do the places look like in actuality. So I asked, and I suggest when people work with artists who don't visit a space, that they share a lot of visual images or videos if it's possible. So I asked a lot of images, so they gave me a whole drive of virtual images. And from there, I guess I read a lot of, I read and reread the papers a couple of times, and everybody had, like they mentioned, the three writers had their three ideas of how they wanted to visualize it. So initially it was supposed to be just black and white, simple kind of comic style. And then when we went with it, I sort of tried to incorporate what they had in mind, but it sort of did not click, I think. And I felt a bit frustrated. And also I sort of didn't know what to do with it, because I was like, okay, what do you want, right? As an artist, like from the person who has not been there and who's not doing the research, I don't understand what you want. But then again, it allowed me to take a step back and then look at it in a different way and think about it differently, because I was looking at it from a perspective of a commissioned artist in the beginning. But afterwards, after like the first round of drafts that I did, I think I stepped back and I was thinking that I am not thinking creatively. I'm thinking of it as a commission, and I'm just thinking of the images that they told me. So let me take a step back and think about how would I visualize it if it was my paper that I'm writing, or if it was a storybook that I'm writing. So then I rethought of everything, and I also approached them and asked them if they would be interested in having it in watercolor, sort of motif digital and watercolor as a combination, and make it look sort of more, not a comic, but more of a illustrated book rather than a comic. So that's when it took a bit longer than anticipated, because coloring it in takes a lot of time. But I think in the end, it worked out quite well. So from this experience, like not working on my own research and illustrating it, I guess that I would suggest that researchers, they tell the artist what they would like, but also that they give a lot of references and they give a space to play with, I guess. So yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Natasha, Surindar, Nipesh, and Promina, to bring things out. Let me just ask you questions to, lay out a few things from your own art piece, which is in front of me, by the way. So I will go with the questions on subject, where you have touched upon, and it is beautifully narrated by three of you that how you three are speaking different language of, discipline. But at the same time, I will also give credit to Promina to bring you all together into this one art form through this. But interestingly, as scholar, I have never imagined really bringing science into this format, which is a very strong way to convey what we like to. But as rightly mentioned by all three of you, that it's not easy to really see what we want to showcase through the artwork. Whereas because our tool is writing, so we use it much stronger way than the artwork. But so that way, I think it's a very good fusion, I will say, of science and art. But my question now is more focused on the subject itself, because it's about the life of a canal, and that's why we are discussing it here today in the water arts. So Nipesh, my first question comes to you, because Colombo is very well known for its colonization as well as its indigeneity of the place. And you had have probably all your life earlier had a chance to really live through these canals, right? I mean, and also interact with people in general about life along the water side and all. But when you got into this research and you were really looking at the canal as a project, it's different. And how did you really reach out to people to give a narrative to you so that you can really then extract your subjective outlook for the project, I mean, for the canal for that matter?
So when the project came, so the idea was like me and Natasha were in conversation. We were trying to develop something along the both of our expertise, and at that time I was living in Colombo, so I went along and there were other interests along this canal. So how the one of the incidents which Natasha briefly mentioned in the beginning that pointed out was about the way one particular person who was fishing in the canal struck me. At Colombo, to give you a brief context, the Colombo municipal boundary, the Colombo city itself is very clean, and to even contextualize it further, before going to Colombo, I was living in Switzerland. So that is the comparison I'm making. So you come in and you go like, it's a tropical city where it's like raining and leaves falling, everything, but it's impeccably clean streets. And there's a politics, quite a dirty politics behind it, but nonetheless, it's striking as when you first visit the city. And while I was scouting for ideas along the canal, I saw a man fishing from the bridge. So he was standing on the bridge and he'll throw the net in the canal and just pull out. The fish comes. And sometimes the fish would come, but almost every time there'll be like some sort of garbage, a soda can or a plastic bottle, something which will come up. So instead of throwing it on the footpath, you would throw it back in the canal. So I was quite amazed that actually it's in this person's interest to throw it in the footpath, because every time he's collecting, maybe he's getting the same thing again and again. And
that's interesting observation.
Yeah, because the whole politics, that's why I call it the dirty politics of being a clean city, has led to sort of an idea that you cannot dirty the streets. You can dirty the canal, not the street.
All waste around the world gets into the water. I mean, that's what I am studying and teaching.
Yeah. So that is what led to the inquiry, where we started discussing, and Natasha had other ideas, and then we said, yeah, this is interesting to look at. And in terms of the initial approach, we in the beginning we were looking at asking people to narrate their stories in the place, because they were living there, how it was like when they were a child, and then when they grew up, how it was. So basically they were telling their life stories, and in that themes emerged. So the crocodile would emerge, the fishing would emerge, like the themes which we would later go back and inquire more thematically. But the initial we did not go there with a question. We were like, okay, we're studying this, how was it when you moved in, and how it changed.
So my question then is to Natasha, because have a very interesting question. Do you know crocodiles? Because when Nipesh is asking, do you know about the canal? You're kind of guiding or interesting question, very down to earth question for common people. Instead of asking fish, you say, do you know the crocodiles, you know? So did you really anticipate that people were concerned beyond the fish, which is the source of their livelihood, beyond into the ecosystem of the canal, you know, I mean, or the life in the canal? Because fish people will be interested because they have things to do with it. I mean, there's a service which they get out of it. So what is your take on it? I mean, what is the sense you get out of it?
Well, I never anticipated the crocodiles until fieldwork began. Now, obviously, once they were mentioned, I started looking and they'd been reported on in the paper and things like this. But what struck me really early on in kind of my first scoping trip, where we were working on training the RA and doing some of the initial interviews myself, was actually a lot of people were talking about, they weren't using the word ecosystem, but a lot of the stories we were being told were focusing on that. So whether it was the crocodiles, and they came up really early on, you know, I think it was only the third or fourth kind of person we chatted with on and really initial transect walk, where we weren't even doing formal interviews yet, said, oh, if you go and look, the crocodiles might be down there. Of course, I ran to look. They weren't down there anymore. I was really disappointed. Spent a lot of time searching for the crocodiles myself. But a lot of people were talking about, particularly older people, were telling us things about, you know, when they were young, they were able to use the canal to swim in, and now it was too dirty because there was too many kind of bugs and things in it. Other people were talking about, you know, kind of at certain bits of the canal, oh, well, we used to be able to, you know, this area wasn't developed before, and so they kept, you know, dairy cattle, and we'd wash the cows there. You know, there was lots of discussions. A few people mentioned that they used to see a lot more birds. So there were all of these discussions about how the canal had fundamentally changed that weren't always linked to, you know, weren't always explicitly discussing the ecosystem, but were really indicating how things had changed in the ecosystem of the canal. And so the crocodiles, like I said, just emerged because it was this kind of quite interesting thing that kept coming up, but really fundamentally because of the ways that people understood them. And so, I make the point in...
Yeah, yes,
sorry.
Just curious, sorry, go ahead. Just curious.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, sorry.
Right. I was going to say, I make the point in the book that fundamentally, I don't actually even care how the crocodiles came to be. I mean, I do because I'm curious, but really fundamentally for me, it's about how people understood how they came to be. You know, their knowledge is the more important thing.
Yeah, but just adding to what Nipesh was talking about, the dirty politics, I would like to just extend a question to you on, you know, looking at the dirty politics, even from safeguarding ecosystem. How do people, you know, even not only in Colombo or Sri Lanka for that matter, Pan, South Asia, we have had this, you know, challenge of, you know, safeguarding ecosystem services where politics plays a very, very important role, or leadership also plays an important role. But when you went into these community engagements or interactions, did you really see that the urge among the people to really keep the canal clean, or it's just visually clean, and as Nipesh was saying, when you pick it up, there is something coming from, you know, bottom of it?
I think the thing is, it's not even visually clean in certain places, you know. There's an environment police, there are different efforts to clean the canal semi-regularly of debris, and everyone agrees that those are positive moves. But I think at the same time, particularly people who speak to how the canal gets polluted, it ends up being a trade-off.
Yes.
You know, we pollute the canal, obviously not always using those words, but we only throw it in the canal if it's not an option, or these sorts of things. So it speaks to the ways in which it intersects with other systems and other forms of governance, other rules in the city, where the canal becomes at certain times a non-place that can be polluted if there's no other option.
Yeah, more like a prisoner's dilemma situation for the community, you know, so it's almost like that. Yeah. So let me just turn to Surindar now and ask the question on interesting those two ladies who are sitting there and talking about it. Yeah, so just taking the conversation further from where Natasha really talked about that people mentioned. So I just want to understand from your perspective, because you bring upon the aspect of epidemics, you know, so related health aspect of it. And I would like to also invite you to the urban epidemics network in the world. So I will just connect you to them, because that will be a wonderful platform to also talk about these things. It's a large network. But coming back to the health aspect of it, do people really realize the relationship of a dirty canal with you know, I mean, bad canal and bad health? Do people make this relationship?
I think some do, but I think a lot of it depends on what they think the pollution is and where that pollution has come from, and whether that pollution is historic or whether it's still going on. So we had some people saying, you know, there's issues with sewage from the houses neighbouring the canal. Other people were saying, you know, there's factories upstream which are discharging, discussions around boats and all sorts of things. And I think certainly from a public and environmental health point of view, there's always a danger when you start getting rumours and speculation and no one is there getting hold of these and actually clarifying what, you know, are there problems, are there not problems, what's the evidence, what's the action that needs to be taken, you know, is it safe to eat things from this water? Is it safe to play in the water? Because that information isn't readily available there, people are guessing. And then when you start getting rumors and you know, disinformation, then it's not really a good position to be in from a public health point of view at all. And you know, it was impacting. So if people thought, okay, there's sewage coming into this water from the neighbouring houses, they're not going to want to eat the fish that have been caught in there, for example. So yeah, I think they were making that connection, particularly with smells. You know, I think the smell and the sort of sewage smell, yeah, was pretty strong. So I think, you know, that connection from that point of view was quite easy to make.
Yeah, interesting. So I have a common question for all three of you. Maybe you can answer, then I will come to Promina and with some very interesting question for her, actually. So my question to three of you is that, do you think that having the scientific paper and this work alongside will have a larger, you know, reader base, or do you think you would like to have your research as a separate product and this as a separate product? And are you discussing this? Or, I mean, what I'm trying to understand is, I'm sure you have a full baggage of research behind it to have this beautiful little book, which is very handy to, you know, just go through in like half an hour and then take half day to absorb it. So what was your, you know, thoughts about to bring them together? I mean, both the scientific part of it and this lighter version of it. Go ahead.
Natasha?
I will. I think in part, it is about a wider audience, but it's also about a more diverse audience. The reality is that a lot of people just aren't going to read a scientific paper, are they? I mean, there is a certain thing, scientific papers for all sorts of reasons, not least of which because they're, you know, often behind paywalls and things, so people can't access them. So for us, it was quite important that this book be, you know, Creative Commons, so people could access it. But it's also the reality that a lot of people will happily read this book, be interested in what's happened, that might lead them to the more scientific stuff, or it might not.
Yes.
but it's going to arm them with that information that would never then delve into, you know, a journal article, for example. So for me, it was as much about this broader audience, but also then using it as a teaching resource, as we talked about previously.
Can I add something?
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, Nipesh, I don't know if you were going to say something at the same time. Yeah, I just wanted to throw out there that, you know, a lot of the work I do is interdisciplinary, and that's a bit of an essential because there aren't very many of us working in my specific field at the university, so it kind of forces it a little bit, which I think is a really good thing. But what follows from that sometimes is a bit of a challenge about where you publish your academic work. So everyone wants us to do this interdisciplinary research. I think it's an advantage often when you're seeking funding, but when it comes to actually publishing, you know, the outputs in some kind of high-ranking journal, then it can be a challenge, you know, finding the right home for it, because that's not often how journals work. So I think, you know, that is something that we should be looking at. But this illustrated book has been a way of sharing findings very quickly as well, and hopefully to a range of audiences. And we're using it, you know, I've got lectures in the next couple of weeks where we're using it for research methods teaching. So it's good, you know, it can take a year or more to get a paper published, and this has been really good to get out there more quickly.
Sure. Nipesh, you want to add here?
Just a small point that journal articles are basically what the academics write for other academics. So, and then it's a very focused and then quite a different way of writing, and because you deal with the interest of what the other academics would want to, and you engage with the dialogue with them, while the illustrated book has a different audience in mind, so it's completely written in a different way.
Interesting. And that's important also. And nowadays, I'm also coming across many scholars who are also taking this route of actually bringing this science and society together, you know, because the readership base, as well as where you are intending to bring a behavioral change, is also this larger, reader base or society for that matter. And I will bring Promina here to the conversation and ask first about this very fact that because you are very much aware that how strong tool these kind of creative works are to really bring people's imagination and even change people's heart, towards something. All art forms for that matter, whether it is song or any other music or even paintings and drawings. Because you have been doing it for quite some time and you have also developed this knack of, bringing scientific work into this art form, where do you really see that, especially when we talk about water crisis, climate crisis, and all these things, that science is really exploiting this art form more rigorously than before, or it should? I mean, do you think we are really using enough of it? I would really like to have you for all my lake works, which is my scientific work, but I have to find out how to do that.
I think it's being underused, not just like comics, but even visuals in general, from film to animation. I think it's kind of underused because, as Nipesh mentioned, it's a really good way and a really good tool to create accessibility to people who will not read it. So when I was in university, yes, we read academic papers and we read books, but when you bring in the visual element, it sort of brings in a playfulness, right? So people actually get attracted to images, so they will look at images. It's the same with infographics that researchers use. So it gives you information in a visual as well as in the wordiness. So you get to experience it through a feeling or through an emotion. And I think it's extremely underused because I think visual information sticks a bit more in the brain than like a document. You might remember something, but a visual document, a visual picture sticks in your mind. So I actually like looking at children's literature and visuals that children are given through book illustrations, because looking at how children interact with images is also how I feel that adults interact with it. So we remember much more through the visuals, we experience much more through the visuals, and then we read, and then we remember it much more differently. So I think it's kind of being underused, like from videos. It's not just like illustration, but any form of art.
Yeah, interesting. And now I have a funny question for you all, because you have the characters, your own authors of these three narratives, right, in the book. How did you come up about this idea, like, you know? And this one page where all three of them are really scratching their head and biting their nails.
Initially, when we had the conversation, it was about these characters. So it wasn't supposed to be them. It was this character who was interviewing, this character who's, you know, collecting boxes and so forth. But then, as I mentioned, when I revisited the article and I rethought about how I would imagine it and how would I feel better about the work, like how would I think about it. So basically there's this thing that I use when I do books or when I illustrate is, would I pick up the book itself? Would I buy it? You know, would I spend time on it? So that's what I was thinking about. And then instead of creating a character that I don't know about or that the reader might not associate with, I was thinking, why not use the authors themselves and actually ask them, is it okay if I illustrate your faces? Because they might not like the portraits that I make of them. So that was a bit of, and I was thinking about the research and I was thinking about also the distance. So I used Polaroid. So in some of the images, you may have noticed if you flip through the book that there are Polaroids. So I used Polaroids because it's about imagining things that you haven't actually visited. So for me, that's how I played with the idea. Like, how do I show it without thought bubbles, but show it with, you know, that sort of work.
Interesting. Let me be very honest. When Nipesh shared me this little book, I was just quick to go through it within no time. Vis-a-vis, you all will agree, all three of you will agree that if you had sent me all the research papers and all, I would have taken months to go through it, which is very natural. So that we should accept. And I think it's a good time for all science scholars like us who are really dealing with environmental issues and societal issues. We may try to find more of these kind of, you know, interface of art and science, and try to convey these hard facts of life or of planet, for that matter here, in a more easier way, where people are more able to appreciate before they understand. You know, I mean, to understand, they have to first accept what is being told, and these kind of mediums become very strong. So I really want to thank you for bringing this little book out for us. At least now I can think that, okay, they are coming up with the book or the report, which can be read, because now we know the gist of it, you know. So we in science, we have to try this, you know, approach, which we haven't tried because it is still not in the scientific domain. And that's pity, you know, I mean, to put this kind of work outside the scientific domain. So we have K.T. Ravindran sir, so it's really honor to have him here, but I wonder if he would like to ask a question to our authors here. Good evening, sir. And Abdul is also, sir, please go ahead.
Thank you for asking me to comment on it.
Yeah, I saw you here, so.
Wonderful to see this effort. I think, as you rightly put it, a whole universe can be opened by opening this one window of a canal and its water, and then the inquiry can go into so many different directions. And I think that being generated by a participatory process by the actual users of the canal, and then that flowering into a set of inquiries, is a very, very interesting process. So I must congratulate all the participants, especially Nipesh, whom I have known very closely for a long time, for venturing into this idea. I think it's a wonderfully well done effort. My question would be that who actually is your audience? Now, if you say that the issues are generated by people who probably don't speak or read English like the rest of us do, will this find a Sinhalese translation or a Tamil translation? And would it then really reach the people who are actually experientially living the environment? That's my question. Nipesh can answer.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, sir, for both the question and the appreciation. When we were writing the book, we had in mind the translation. So of course the general audience when we were doing the project was to use it as a teaching manual, so basically for students. So we expected them to be speaking English, but from the very beginning we had to ask Promina, and then she also suggested that we can have a base file without any of the text. So we have that, so that we don't have to go back to the drawing board again. So we have produced the booklet, and we have produced a base file without the text, which can later be updated. So this we had in mind to translate it in at least Sinhala and Tamil. We haven't found sort of it's more pragmatic matter of funding to find a translator who could do this, because it's translation it requires a lot more time than if one of us could do it. It would have been much easier.
Interesting, because I was thinking that we should translate it in many languages, but I was not imagining the funding part of it, which is very important, because this is not only a case of Canal of Colombo. It's I think most of the South Asia we are struggling, even for that matter Africa, South America, many places where we are struggling with this kind of I will say social ecological issues around water systems. So let me just invite our ex-speaker, Abdul Rashid Bhatt, because he is also an artist who is really working very hard on the water bodies of Jammu and Kashmir and doing documentation in the photographic and videographic. So Abdulji, you saw some interesting work today. So maybe you would like to share with our speakers your experience, and if you have any questions for them.
Very good evening.
Dal Lake, actually. Just a few
very good evening, everyone. This was really a very interesting, as I was traveling actually, but still I was listening to all the experts. They show their work, how they have made their this artwork and showcasing that to the audience. But my take is really this art is such a thing that anyone, if I can talk, as you already told that I made a documentary on Dal Lake, Srinagar, which I dedicated to a person who is an artist. You saw that Niaz Ahmed, who made some artistic work for the conservation of Dal Lake. And you can't imagine, when I showcased that documentary in various, there's international as well as the national film festivals or in the conferences, that artwork was appreciated by everyone. They showcased that how these beautiful pictures are there. And this is the artist who showcased it. If you made a documentary, but these small clips or small artwork is showcasing what you have shown us in 28 minutes. So that is the beauty of an art. Similarly, there is, I'm making another documentary, which is currently I'm working on, that is on climate change. And I am having an artist, who is neither he is able to see, and nor he is able to neither he sees anything. He is not able to see, and nor he is able to speak properly. So that is the beauty, and he is doing such an artwork as far as the climate change is concerned. And I captured his visuals in Goa, that he met me in the beach in Goa. So you can imagine that these artists, they are having their inner mind. So they want to showcase such things which we people who can see, who can speak nicely, we are not able to speak in such a way or demonstrate in such a way. So I can tell you in a nutshell that the artwork in a simple art can show such a thing which can click the person, that this if there is degradation of environment, or there is any problem in any water body or wetland or any other forest, if we can go for this artwork, because artwork is something which is extraordinary, and people nowadays you can see that the students of today's age, they are more influenced by this artwork. So if these type of artists who are today with us, they too can go for they too can do such things and collaborate with us and you, and make such things which we can showcase in most of these like these conferences. So in that way we can have more and more audience who can see that yes, these are the people who have really seen in the field, and now who are showcasing this thing through art. So I congratulate you for having these type of artists with us. And similarly, I'm having another artist who is teaching science through art. I can tell you one artist who is teaching science through art, like through silk painting. So this art is basically nowadays a very good medium through which we should speak about it, and we should have some sort of workshops or some sort of conferences in which we will teach the students how what things we should keep in mind for artwork, and how can we depict these environmental degradation as climate change or something like that. So thank you so much for giving me the time because I was in a hurry. So I was not in that position that I can explain so much, but still what I got from these experts, I told you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Abdulji, and thank you, Nipesh and Natasha and Surindar and Promina for the wonderful session today. We will have it recorded and get it edited for you to really share it with a larger audience. And thanks all the participants who have joined us live for this YouTube from our session. And we thank all our media partners as well as our team partners who make these events possible, because these are all volunteers who are working to make these sessions possible. Do join us next Wednesday. We have Wednesdays for Water coming up, which is our flagship program. And we are talking about innovations in water, wastewater treatment technologies. So the joining link is going to be shared in the website, which is www.for.w.in, which is our mother website as well. So thank you so much, all of you. And it's really nice to learn about these beautiful artworks, and also how science can be brought closer to people, and especially when people are going, their eyeballs are reducing in terms of reading a lot of work. So it becomes very important for us as scholars to really find out new ways to bring the hard science into a softer way. So thanks all of you. Please take care of yourself, and we see each other sometime very soon. Bye-bye.